This is the New Quantum Era. I'm your host, Sebastian Hassinger. Quantum tends to produce two very different kinds of conversation. The academic researcher asks what is true, what is possible, and which problems are worth pursuing, even if the payoff is years away. The investor or institutional leader has to ask a different set of questions. Which technical claims can survive diligence? Which teams can turn them into systems? And where to commit capital, people, and infrastructure before the evidence is complete. Those perspectives need each other, but they don't often live in the same person. Barak Bussel has spent his career moving between them. Barak trained as a theoretical physicist before becoming an entrepreneur and venture capitalist. He's the co-founder of 7i Capital, a deep tech fund with positions across quantum, semiconductors, AI, and clean energy. At the same time, he's the board chair of UCLA's Center for Quantum Science and Engineering, which is in the middle of building something genuinely unusual, a 700,000 square foot research park on the site of the former Westside Pavilion in West LA, meant to convene academics, major industry players, national labs, and startups in one physical space. He talks about it in explicit reference to Bell Labs and to the fact that UCLA sent the first packet of information on what became the internet back in 1969. That's the ambition. We recorded this in person at the KPMG Tech and Innovation Symposium in Deer Valley just a few weeks after what I think has been the most consequential stretch of news in the history of this field. Oratomic, a stealth Caltech spinout with a founding team that includes people like Dolev Bluestein and collaborators around the John Preskill and Robert Huang orbit, came out of stealth with a $300 million Series A. That's the largest first institutional round for a quantum computing company ever. 7i is in the syndicate. On the same day, Google Quantum AI dropped a paper arguing that a fault-tolerant machine on the order of 500,000 physical qubits could be enough to run Shor's algorithm. And 2 weeks earlier, the White House had signed a pair of executive orders on quantum innovation and post-quantum cryptography. So we get into all of it. How you underwrite a company that has explicitly said it will not ship an intermediate product, what deep tech patience actually looks like when a connector problem eats 2 years of your roadmap, why he thinks a lesser-known Google paper on quantum-assisted memory reduction may matter as much as anything else this year, and what the Bell Labs template really means when you're trying to build it in 2026 with a mix of federal dollars, industry partners, and startup capital. It's a wide-ranging conversation, and Barak is exactly the kind of guest who rewards patient listening. Here's Barak Bussel. All right. Thank you very much, Barak, for joining me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I think the logical, there's a bunch of things I want to discuss, but the logical starting point is sort of the most topically interesting aspect of your professional involvement in 7i and its investment in Oratomic. Oratomic has gotten a ton of attention. They've managed to raise $300 million in their first institutional round, based off of a shocking research paper, I think. So tell me a bit about your perspective on Oratomic and what it means for sort of the progression of the industry itself.
We've been tracking the founders for a long time. Obviously, some of them are very well known. We've known Dolev for a while. In fact, we tried to recruit him to UCLA a couple of years ago, and it would have been a major boon to have him at the physics department. But obviously, Caltech can't go wrong with being at Caltech, one of the best in the world, and physics may be hands down the best. So first and foremost for us, with any company that we invest in, is the people. And doing hardware in quantum requires a lot of skills. And if I look across kind of the global ecosystem, this is perhaps one of the best, if not the best, quantum hardware team on the planet, bar none. And so that's the first predicate for us, right? We really appreciate the skill sets from Dolev himself, from John Preskill, Robert Huang.
Never heard of him.
That's right. Well, I hear he's doing some kind of neutral atoms company these days, but not sure which one. So first it's that. And then
it's almost more important than the thesis and the research paper that you value the team in a sense, right?
Yeah, and in many ways, I think, and this is not just true for quantum, it's true in general for every great startup. A lot of times you have to pivot.
Right.
You have to adjust midstream, right? You have to figure things out differently. And that's both technically and from a business model standpoint. So it's really about betting on the horses, on the team that's going to be able to make the adjustments as they go along.
Right.
And certainly, they hands down have the technical chops to do the things that are necessary. And so that's point number one. In addition to that, I think that we're now at a unique time in human history with AI and the ability to do things that 5 years ago would have been unheard of. And companies like Oratomic and others are being aided by the fact that they now have these most incredible compute tools available to them. So I think Oratomic is uniquely positioned to be able to kind of harness and leverage some of these things, together with obviously the capabilities of the team, and as we look ahead, a bit of time, and I won't be too specific, but as we look ahead, I think they're very well positioned to get to a first fault-tolerant machine. And in fact, that's what we've all wanted. Kind of all of us who've been deep in physics and have been part of this ecosystem. This is the goal. This is the holy grail, to get to the first fault-tolerant machine. Yeah. And I think they're very well positioned to do that.
And what's shocking to me is, sort of the original resource estimations, the first ones done after Shor's algorithm was formulated were something like 20 to 30 million physical qubits.
Right.
Craig Gidney brought that down an order of magnitude a couple of years ago. Pinnacle in Australia with the iceberg approach brought it down to hundreds of thousands. But this is now tens of thousands of physical qubits. What's the sort of, is there a specific sort of ratio? I think people think in terms of ratio of physical to logical qubits that they're shooting for with their architecture?
So one of the things that happened also, or just around the same time, you referenced the paper that Oratomic, came out of stealth with and published. Google published a paper on the same day.
Yeah.
And Google's paper talked about, Google Quantum AI talks about, being able to use a superconducting architecture and thinking of doing something like running Shor's algorithm with on the order of 500,000 physical qubits, which, as you pointed out, is a far cry from the 20 million plus that we started with. But it's still a significant, considering the fact that today, with superconducting architectures, we're on the order of hundreds to 10 to the third. We're still pretty far away from that target. Oratomic is using obviously a completely different approach, neutral atoms approach. They've had some brilliant kind of insights and dare I say, some significant breakthroughs on the way of thinking about these things. And as you add to that the latest quantum error correction codes, QLDPC codes, and other things, then you start going down that kind of scale from no longer we're talking about 1,000 to 1 in terms of physical qubits or to logical qubit ratio, or 500 to 1, but a much lower ratio. Now, I don't want to get into like specific numbers, but obviously if you look at the paper, they're talking about something on the order of 10 to the 4th, 10,000 physical qubits, and being able to even attempt to run Shor's algorithm with a machine of that scale is a major breakthrough.
Yeah. And is that there's no intermediate product, right? They're shooting for this fault tolerant device that can essentially break RSA 2048 in a matter of a week or so, something like that is mentioned in the paper. Is it also envisioned to be sort of a general purpose quantum computer with that scale of logical qubits, so it'll be able to run other algorithms for other use cases?
Well, I'm always a little careful when we think about kind of general purpose machines, right? Because, we have general purpose machines more or less now, our laptops and our phones, and they do a pretty darn good job at this. And I think quantum computers are not quite there.
Right. I guess, is it going to be a universal quantum computer in the sense that you can throw other algorithms at it? It's sort of arbitrary quantum circuits it can run at the same sort of, or is it really optimized towards Shor's?
Yeah, I don't think the approach at Oratomic, and frankly, in other companies that are kind of vying for the same mountaintop, I don't think the approach is really a machine that's bespoke, that's designed just to attack kind of RSA 2048. The idea is to be able to do general compute as much as kind of possible. Yeah. And one of the corollaries to that is that, the encryption standards that we've had from the past are no longer going to be enough to protect us.
Right. And I guess, it's always seemed to me that Shor's is almost sort of a blessing and a curse for the field of quantum computing, because it's a theoretical goal that I don't really think there's a similar kind of counterpart to it in classical computing. We sort of started with heuristics and techniques to squeeze, faster computations out of the early computers. We had this idea of being able to break codes long in advance of having the hardware. We still don't have the hardware, but it makes it tangible. Like the power of the device makes it tangible, and it potentially, is attracting more interest from investors. We're certainly seeing more and more investment in quantum, and potentially maturing the market so that there's more exits as well. Do you think that's sort of it has that kind of emotional resonance? It's something tangible that people can sort of relate to, whereas the rest of quantum computing is sort of still mysterious?
I think there are a couple of things that have happened recently that remind me of, 1971, 1972, where first microprocessor from Intel. And, what was Intel preparing to do with that microprocessor? Power a calculator. And we really didn't know, standing here 50 plus years ago, that we're going to get to this place, right? And but what's pretty unique is, just as you kind of outlined, is there's a very interesting problem, right? The ability to run Shor's algorithm and actually, be able to factor large numbers with it. It just so happens that, we kind of predicated our cryptography on the same
how
principle.
hard that is.
But one other thing that happened around the same time is, I think it was April 8th, there was a paper that was published by Google Quantum AI with collaborators from Caltech. Many of them but not all, are founders of Oratomic. And I think that paper, maybe didn't garner as much attention as it should. It is the first time ever, a rigorous analysis that demonstrates that at some point in time, we're going to be able to use quantum processors to vastly decrease the memory requirements to process massive classical data sets. So if you look at kind of the current AI landscape, the problems are we're scaling way too fast for our ability to generate energy to produce memory and so on. And for the first time ever, there was theoretical analysis that shows that with quantum, AI working in concert with quantum at some point in time, that exponential increase is going to decrease some. So we're not going to have the same kind of ravenous, increase in energy consumption and in memory consumption.
And that's That's due to the ability to encode in very high dimensional space, right? Using that Hilbert space in the quantum computer to represent the data. So there's still the overhead of encoding into that high dimensional space and then decoding, I would assume.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And look, it's also, question is what does massive data set mean?
Yeah.
And we're talking about exabytes,
Yeah.
right? So for us today, that's massive.
Yeah.
But at the rate that we're growing, consuming AI resources, 2 or 3 years from now, exabytes may be par for the course.
Yeah. A thumb drive.
That's right. It's a pretty cool thumb drive, right? But I mean, it's pretty amazing that, we finally see kind of how close, two completely different approaches to life, right?
Mm-hmm.
One is very, kind of based on classical, techniques and neural networks and other things, and the other one is very, kind of deeply ingrained in quantum mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
But we see kind of how these things are converging, and as we move forward, it's not just being able to factor large numbers,
right?
But also being able to kind of harness the high dimensional Hilbert space to be able to do things that we just can't do today at all.
Right.
So I'm pretty excited about kind of the future of this.
I want to widen the aperture because I think this is a really good opportunity to talk about. Seven Eye is not just a quantum fund. It's actually been a deep tech fund for quite some time. So, I'm curious from that perspective, like to what degree, like that's sort of, there's other examples from your experience in deep tech where that kind of convergence potentially happens, and also that it requires patience and foresight to sort of, wait for those advances to come and actually start to see the benefits from. Is that sort of part and parcel as a deep tech investor?
It really has to be.
Yeah.
Because the design cycles in hardware are just that much longer than they are in anything related to software. And even though the timeframes are accelerating both on the software side with all the AI goodness that we see, but also, on the hardware side, we're going to be aided in designing things and in modifying them and so forth with these new tools as well. But still, you're producing a new chip, you're designing it, then you may be leveraging kind of an outside foundry like TSMC, and then there's a cycle of kind of, we call it taping out, right? You're sending your designs, you're getting these things prototype, comes back, you need to test them. All of a sudden, 1.5 years has passed.
Yeah.
And in hardware, you also see things that are incredibly hard that people who don't do this every day a priori don't expect it to be hard.
Right.
For example, one of our portfolio companies was doing some really breakthrough work in photonics in the past, and to your point, it takes a lot of patience. It's you have to be, it's the proverbial definition of patient capital, right? You really have to be in it for the long game.
Yeah.
And they taped a new kind of semiconductor. They prototyped it a lot in-house. It was a combination of, kind of silicon and non-silicon based, semiconductors. And the device was being tested and was working great. But in order to put it as part of a system, you needed to be able to connect it to a flex connector. And that became a challenge that lasted, just given kind of the density of, through silicon vias and other things, it became a challenge that took 2 years to figure out how to
plug it in.
How to plug it in, right? It's like, it's a no-brainer. Yeah, this is not a big deal.
You just turn the USB plug upside down.
That's right. So look, we see the same thing in quantum, right? Yeah. Where the cabling, the cable infrastructure is very challenging.
There's that category that's like really hard engineering problem, but I think for what characterizes deep tech, including quantum, is that you've got a mix of engineering and science challenges, and the science challenges are very hard to forecast exactly what amount of effort it's going to take to get to a solution that you can then engineer into actual technology. Is that also something you have to manage as a deep tech investor?
Sebastian, it's as you're kind of asking that, I was reminded of an example where we're working in the portfolio company that was doing some work in advanced energy, and that work depended on two parts. The first part was, does the physics work?
Right.
And when you're doing stuff, and sometimes we call material science like black magic, just because it's so. I mean, we don't yet have the ability to kind of simulate the quantum mechanics. I mean, in that kind of granularity. And maybe we will.
Right.
We have these great tools.
I was about to say.
Great quantum computers coming, right? From Oratomic.
Back to Feynman. That was his original sort of insight, is if you want to simulate nature, you need a quantum computer.
That's right. So the ability to do that for many decades, as we've grown in material science, the adage has been, you got to build it and see. Right, because there's no alternative.
Right.
So you need to be able to bring the physics almost to the point, so there's no clear violation of any like first principles. But once you're there, then you really need to build it. And so you're absolutely right in the sense that the early work in some of these companies is kind of basic science in certain respects. It's basic applied science.
Yeah.
And it's like, is this even going to work?
Right.
Is there somehow, does the second law of thermodynamics somehow prohibit, this migration? But once you do this, once you convince yourself that it's possible, then starts kind of the engineering work. And that engineering work is not trivial. As a theoretical physicist, sometimes, we think, building the dam or building the bridge is no big deal. I already figured out the principles, right? But in fact, that's where most of the doing happens, right? Yeah. And some of it is less linear at the front end, and some of it becomes, once you understand things better, the transition becomes, where people have done it before, then it becomes more linear and more well understood.
The other thing I notice is, sub challenges. You can sort of get to the point where you can turn the science into engineering, but then things like transduction, for example, which looks like it's going to be key to scaling and superconducting devices, there isn't really a good foundational way to transduce microwave frequencies to telecom frequencies. There's a bunch of sort of ways you can do it that are hacky and end up with like 65% fidelity or whatever. And that's like a scientific, fundamental scientific breakthrough that needs to happen in order to, at least the way we're approaching transduction right now, that's, just a subcomponent of overall systems engineering and building the thing. It feels like there's all kinds of potential hidden challenges, like your connector example, that are also, very fraught in deep tech.
As we think about this, it's like, let's put a data center up in space. Great, because it's cold in outer space. But how does the heat actually, how do we conduit the heat out of these things, right? So to your point, there's a lot of interesting things, a lot of interesting problems that we have to solve. And it's not just figuring out the best qubits. And it's not just about, what's the best error reduction schemes. If we can think about this together for a second, I mean, I was got a privilege to present some results from one of our portfolio companies, a quantum software company called Kedma. And
I had Dorit on the podcast a couple of years ago.
You did?
Yeah.
Oh, she's fantastic.
I know.
I mean, so if you think about kind of error reduction broadly, it's some kind of hybrid of error suppression, error mitigation, and error correction. And obviously, we're not yet in the place where we can do a lot with error correction in terms of, putting together logical qubits from physical ones. But, we're getting closer and closer. Until we get to that point, I presented a set of results where, the company was working in partnership with IBM and, with a Japanese supercomputing
Riken,
leader, Riken, exactly. And it was a basic physics problem. It's an Ising model. And they took an IBM Heron 2 chip with 156 physical qubits. They selected 51 of those qubits and essentially turned them into 51 logical qubits. And they did that by, obviously there's no free lunch, so you have to leverage some classical compute. And the results were comparing 10,000 classical CPU hours to a few hours, a handful of hours of QPU time with the IBM chip, and several hundred hours of classical CPU time working together.
Right, with the Kedma error mitigation. Yeah.
And the incredible thing, Sebastian, is looking at those results, again, as a physicist, just, from the purity of those results, were we were really at the edge of the ability to simulate things classically.
Right.
And some of that simulation included simulation of behavior that up until today, we, meaning kind of physicists, have only been able to say qualitative things about based on kind of what the physics says.
Yeah.
But we were never able to actually simulate them quantitatively.
Right.
And obviously this is now months old.
Yeah.
And there are going to be some new results that are published that are going to even blow those away. So I think we're really at this place where we're pushing the envelope on what's been possible up until now.
Yeah. And that sort of brings to mind, the role of the academic world. The scientific skills are required to sort of drive these challenges forward in deep tech generally, and quantum specifically. Scientific skills tend to be concentrated in the academic community and in the public sector and national labs in places like RIKEN. Is that sort of, you're a physicist by training. You play a role at UCLA at the Center for Quantum Science and Engineering. Is that sort of your main motivation in bringing in and enlisting the scientific community and academia and the public sector to help with those fundamental challenges in the technology arena?
When we look at industry today, industry certainly has the scale, the numbers of engineers and the ability to throw 500 kind of experts at a problem. But often industry doesn't have the kind of quiet depth to think very deeply about a problem over an extended period of time, 2 or 3 generations ahead of what industry does today. That's really the role of academia, where we bring in that depth, whereas industry brings the scale. And in order for us to advance the state of the art in quantum, and frankly, the state of the art in fusion, and the state of the art in pretty much every other area of deep tech, we need to marry these two things together in a way that makes sense for the 21st century.
Right.
And for me, that's, we chatted a little bit before about Bell Labs, and that's really the kind of the model that provided inspiration for the Center for Quantum Science and Engineering. It's how do we convene academics, major industry participants, government agencies, and startups to kind of all cohabitate and cross-pollinate in a single physical space. They will do kind of proprietary research and other things behind closed doors, but then they get to, spend time together in the common areas and eat and drink and be merry together to really further what is possible, both kind of on the science side, but also on the innovation side. So that is really what the Center for Quantum Science and Engineering is. It started as a kind of multidisciplinary collab on campus between the School of Engineering, which, the UCLA School of Engineering is one of the most storied progenitor of semiconductor companies anywhere. Probably hands down the best in the United States. Where companies like, Broadcom and Innovent and Newport Communications and most recently Silvus and others, came out of that ecosystem. So to collab between the School of Engineering and the Division of Physical Science, where we have somewhere between 150 and 200 researchers, postdocs, graduate students, all working together in their respective fields to progress what is possible in quantum information science. So that's kind of how things started. And from the time that I joined as chairman about 6 years ago, one of the things that's been very unique is that we were looking for a physical space, a physical instantiation of what's a kind of a collab on campus among different researchers. And we were literally scouring the west side of LA for 3 years, and it's not the easiest place to find great real estate. And it just so happens that there's a former shopping center. Right. It used to be called the Westside Pavilion. It was a staple of LA life for decades. And Google had leased that space before the pandemic. And they were planning to turn it into Google's Southern California campus and have probably a couple of thousand scientists and engineers located there. And obviously the pandemic happened, so plans changed. And a couple of years ago, UCLA became the beneficiary of that in the three-way transaction with Google and the property owner. And now UCLA owns pretty much the whole former Westside Pavilion space, with one exception. It's a massive space, 700,000 square feet of space. Yeah. And as you look across, if we do our job well over the next 3 to 5 years, this is going to be one of the best research parks on the planet. So we're transforming into a world-class research park that has two cornerstones. One of them is called the California Institute for Immunology and Immunotherapy. So it's all about life sciences. And the other is our baby, which is kind of quantum at the research park, basically advancing everything across the board on quantum information science, not just in computing, but in quantum sensing, in quantum communications and networking, and then things kind of that are in between, semiconductors and microelectronics and material science, et cetera. And our friends at the CIII, the California Institute for Immunology and Immunotherapy, they have the modest goal of curing all chronic diseases. And as a scientist, if we were having this conversation 15 years ago, I probably would have told you it's a great lofty goal, but probably not something that we'll see in our lifetime. Today, I think about this differently, and I think these things are actually achievable. I'll add one more thing. We talked about going to the moon earlier, and so it was October 29th, 1969, I believe, where the first packet of information was sent from UCLA to SRI up at Stanford. And that was the first packet that was sent on what became later the internet. That was ARPANET. ARPA was the predecessor of DARPA. And those were the first two nodes that became later four and expanded from there. And at UCLA, we're doing some, together with major industry participants, we're doing some phenomenal work on quantum communications and quantum networking. And it's a bit prophetic, right? That, we've gone, 55, close to 60 years now, and we're coming back full circle to be able to do that at the research park as well. So we're very excited about the future, but what's possible to do in this kind of setting.
Right. I mean, the last thing I want to touch on is you've posted on LinkedIn about the sort of increased awareness and focus on quantum technologies at the federal level, with a couple of executive orders and the DOE Quantum Genesis mission and other things. Do you see that as, at the level of urgency and focus that it needs to be? Is that sort of a good step, but there needs to be more attention, more funding, more, coordination, more convening, or what's your sort of feeling there?
I think that the federal government has done a fantastic job as of late. In the last couple of years, really paying very close attention to what's important and what's going to drive the needs of national and economic security of the United States going forward. And not just in the United States, but broadly of the U.S. and all of its allies. So now, could there be more? Absolutely. But we have a very unique kind of approach in the United States, which is different from what it is, with our distinguished competitors outside. So, if you look at kind of China, I think last year we looked at a new government fund in China that, was allocated to various areas of deep tech with some quantum theme, was $138 billion. Just one government fund. So obviously the Chinese government is putting a lot of resources, a lot of muscle behind these things because they believe they're strategically important, as we do here in the US. So there's a very important role for government to play. And the new $2 billion vehicle and the renewed focus on these areas is very important. And I think back to, if you look close to LAX, to LA International Airport, the area surrounding it, it's called El Segundo, and it's full of aerospace companies. Traditionally, it was the bastion of aerospace for the U.S., where Hughes used to be.
Right.
Now Boeing and Raytheon and a number of other major companies, and there's a tremendous renaissance in space companies there. It's incredible. It's really breathtaking to see, companies that, I was having this conversation with a friend that has a very substantial satellite company, and I said to him, wow, 10 or 15 years ago, this company would never have gotten funding. They just recently raised another $500 million. So it's amazing, what's going on in that ecosystem. But if you look at some of the buildings, some of the older Skunk Works buildings and others, those weren't built by the companies that occupy them. Those were built by the United States government decades ago. And then part of the kind of private-public partnership was, let us help with the infrastructure and we'll let you loose. You're gonna occupy these buildings and you're gonna create kind of the next generation of great science and technology. And I think that model works well for the US. So do we need more? Absolutely.
Sure.
and
I didn't expect you to say no.
But it's important that the more comes in a very targeted approach where, I think typically in the US, government is not the best at picking the winners and losers in the marketplace, but it's great at enabling.
Yes.
DARPA is a great example of that. And so prepare the ground and help pay attention to all these things and add the resources as necessary. So I think the role of the federal government, and frankly, the role of, for us in California, the role of the state of California. The governor's office, it's very, pays very close attention to this. They've put significant resources to work, and they will continue doing that. So I think it's really kind of across the board, the role of government to help catalyze and enable this. Because otherwise it's going to be very hard for any country to compete. And we're in a pretty important competitive landscape right now.
You said before we started recording, it was sort of an all hands on deck kind of moment, and I couldn't agree more. So this has been really, really great, Barak. I appreciate your time and
likewise
the depth of experience that you bring to it. So thank you very much.
Sebastian. Thank you.
Excellent.
Hope it was okay.
Easy. Fantastic.
Thanks again to Barak Bussel for a genuinely wide-ranging conversation. The line I keep coming back to is his framing of the university's role. Industry has the scale, but academia has what he called the quiet depth to think about a problem 2 or 3 generations ahead. That's a useful way to think about why places like CQSE exist and why the Bell Labs analogy is more than a marketing line. It's actually a claim about how deep tech gets built. I want to thank Richard Entrup and the rest of the KPMG team again for hosting me this week at the Symposium. It's been a tremendous experience, and I had a really good time with conversations with Barak and many, many others. Full show notes for this episode are at newquantumera.com, including links to the Oratomic Series A coverage, the KEDMA and IBM Heron 2 results Barak referenced, and the 2 June 2026 executive orders, and background on the UCLA Research Park and the SoCal Quantum Alliance. If you're new to the show and want more on the venture side of quantum, I'd point you to episode 96 with Fergun Ventures and episode 79 with Martin Laforêt, both good companions to this conversation. While you're on the site, sign up for the newsletter. That's where I share the links, papers, and half-formed thoughts that don't always make it into an episode. If you're getting value from the New Quantum Era, the single most useful thing you can do is share an episode with one person who'd appreciate it and leave a rating wherever you listen. It genuinely helps other curious listeners find the show. Thanks for listening. I'm Sebastian Hassinger, and this has been The New Quantum Era. Theme music by OCH. See you next time.